Welcome, everybody. I'll give it just at least another minute. All right, it's 12 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome you to the monthly ASQ Lean Enterprise Division webinar. And this month we will have Paul Harbath speak to us about the unique challenges of applying Lean to small organizations. Paul is going to be introducing himself, but I did want to remind you that the Lean Enterprise Division holds these webinars monthly, and they're always the second Wednesday of the month at noon Central Time. So we will have another one again in April, and we'll have Walter Czakowski speaking to us about technology and Lean and how Lean is applied in the new world of advancing technology and what that looks like. So I'm going to hand it over to Paul and let Paul get started.
Ellen, thank you very much. First off, just want to thank Ellen and
Paul,
ASQ. Yeah, can you hear me?
Hello?
Can you hear me? I'm showing up as,
okay.
It looks like I'm talking.
Okay, did you hear me, Paul? I'm sorry.
Yep, I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. So again, wanted to thank Ellen and thank the webinar series for the invite. Also want to thank everybody for taking your time out of your busy day to listen to our discussion here about the unique challenges of applying Lean to small organizations. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present the slides and we will go through the presentation. Then if you have any questions, you can send those questions to Ellen, and then at the end of the, after I've gone through the slides, we will come back and answer any questions that you have. So that way, make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. So first, just a little bit about me. I've been in quality for a long time. In fact, 29 years, as you can see up there, as a member of ASQ. First half of my career was in larger organizations. First large organization that I was with, probably, maybe 10, 12,000 people, maybe a little less than that, 8,000. Second company large company that I worked for was Lazy Boy, the actual furniture manufacturer. I worked for one of the facilities here in Utah. And that company had, they have about 12, 15,000 people in the US. So I'll talk a little bit about how that affected what I did. Then what happened is I went to work for the MEP. MEP is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. It's an organization that it was sponsored by NIST many years ago, and it has a support organization in every state of the US, and in fact, some states like California and Texas have multiple MEPs. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go, because a great way to get support in helping with Lean, no matter what size of the organization, but their primary focus is small organizations. As soon as I went to the MEP, almost exclusively, I was working for small organizations. So let's talk a little bit about when I say small organizations. As you can see here on the chart, the small organizations, when you look at number of establishments, so the number of organizations, when we're talking small, I'm going to use the number of below 50 people. So below 50 people, we're talking about, what is that, 84.4%? Sorry, 84.4% is under 50 people. Now, if you look at the number of employees over on the other side, most employees are in large organizations, but the number of establishments significantly weighted towards small organizations. When we look at what's happened over the last several years, going clear back to 79, you can see that the number of establishments in small organizations has continued to grow. So small establishments, the small manufacturing organizations, are becoming more and more. And we'll talk about here in a second that we are almost all touched by small organizations, but the larger organizations actually like to have the smaller organizations because of flexibility and a variety of different things, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Also, in the NIST client survey, and so if you see down at the bottom here, it talks about NIST MEP. MEP does surveys of clients across the US all the time. Here were some of the challenges that small organizations had, and we're going to talk about several more, but employee recruitment is a big one. It's one where small organizations have a hard time finding the people that they need, especially the highly trained people like all of you. They just have a hard time finding those people. When we think of all of us, when I think of the people that are out there listening today, almost all of us are touched by small organizations. Some of us may actually work in small organizations, but others, if you don't work in small organizations, I can almost guarantee you that a significant portion of your supply chain is a small organization. And the larger organizations like small organizations because they're flexible, they can make things happen and get things done. I was at a workshop here not long ago here in the Utah area, sponsored I think by a city, and two of the larger organizations in the area, Northrop Grumman and Hill Air Force Base, were both at that discussion. The state of Utah, are significant employers, in fact, in terms of manufacturing, are Northrop Grumman and Hill Air Force Base. Northrop Grumman we're all familiar with, but remember that Northrop Grumman recently purchased Thiokol, ATK Thiokol in Utah. That purchase happened just about a year ago. So ATK Thiokol is probably who you're familiar with when you go back to the Challenger disaster and the booster that blew up. It was made here in northern Utah. So when we talk about Northrop Grumman in the state of Utah, we're talking about 20,000 employees or more. When we go and talk about Hill Air Force Base, which is also in northern Utah, same thing, almost 20,000 people. So very large organizations. The reason that they were at this workshop is they wanted to make sure that all the small people that were at this workshop realized they want them to help them. So we have all sorts of small organizations working in composites and manufacturing and all kinds of different things in the state of Utah, just for that reason. Going to make an assumption here as we go through this that everyone has a fair understanding of lean manufacturing. Pretty easy to make that assumption since you're part of the Lean Enterprise division. Did want to talk a little bit about history of manufacturing. The slide I've used many times to describe what's happened in the history of manufacturing. The one that I want to talk about is the people part. If you look at the pre-industrial, 1890, when we go back to Lazy Boy, the organization that I worked for several years, Mr. Knabush and Mr. Shoemaker, in the early 1900s, they were the two people that created, in Monroe, Michigan, created Lazy Boy. When they did that, they were working as a craftsman. And in fact, they were all of the parts of the organization. When you think of it, they were sales, they were accounting, they were everything. That's what a small organization has, is they have all of the aspects of the organization. Well then, so I was actually at the, what would it be, they had a history thing set up in one of the facilities in Monroe, and I had the chance to go see it. And they talked about what had happened. The two guys had decided, oh, it'd be cool to make a reclining chair. They actually went to their customers and they built it with their customers. Now, if you look down underneath on the product part, it talks about non-customized, non-standard products. Everything they made was custom. There was no parts weren't made over using a standard size and all that. It was everything was custom. So when you needed to replace something, it was painful if something broke because you had to go back and make that custom piece again. Well, then they moved into, because they became very popular, they moved into the mass production side. And so again, you can see the parts of the people in terms of the contribution of the people is very minimal, mind-numbing repetitive work. Standardization starts becoming part of it. Management leadership makes all the decisions. I came into the Lazy Boy organization right at the end of all of that because we were just thinking about implementing lean. So the large organizations with all of their standardization and the mass production departments started splitting up. There was an upholstery department, there was a frame department, there was a foam department and a cutting department. All of these departments were split up. So when I started at Lazy Boy, took about 2 days, 2.5 days on average, and the product would travel about a half a mile between cutting and getting put in a box. So pretty much traditional manufacturing. When I left, we were just beginning to make the changes to lean, and we had taken that manufacturing that I just described and we put it in a 40 by 40 cell. So the product was traveling about 100 feet. Instead of taking 2 days to build a chair, we were building a chair in about 1 hour and 45 minutes. So we went, and if you think about it, we almost went back to what Shoemaker and Knabush were doing back in the beginning, and started getting much more personalized and much more local, rather than having these large traditional manufacturing organizations. The reason that's important is because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about these small companies being like what it used to be before lean was even thought about. So as we start talking about making that transition, just kind of important to understand a little bit about that history. Again, I'm going to make the assumption that everyone's fairly familiar with the tools that are used by lean practitioners. And again, I don't think there's any going to be any issue there. The two pillars of involvement of people and continuous improvement are the pillars holding up the house, and we have a whole bunch of different kinds of things. This is just my spin on the House of Lean. But the key is involvement of people and continuous improvement and using all of those tools to do that. One thing that's common no matter what size of the organization is, why should we do this? No matter what size of the organization, you really have to want to change. And so the example or the analogy, I guess, that I use when I start talking to people is, what's your burning platform? What is it that's really important to you that is going to provide you with the incentive to want to change? If you don't have that, and when I say you, I'm talking primarily about the leadership of the organization. If the leadership of the organization has they see no benefit, they see no advantage for doing this, then you're not going to be able to make much happen. And it's almost, you're going to have to make kind of a different approach. We may talk a little bit about that as we go. But the key is a burning platform. Think about the books like Andy and Me and many of the other novel type books about lean, Better Thinking, Better Results. All of those books talk about companies that are just about to go out of business. Andy and Me by Pascal Dennis, just about to go out of business, and then they hire Andy. Andy is an old retired Toyota guy. and bring him in, and of course transforms the company and makes it to where all of a sudden they're profitable again and they don't close the company anymore. So the burning platform was in that case, if we don't do this, we're not going to be around. Well, unfortunately, not all organizations have that kind of a burning platform. So the other question we can ask is, what's the pain? And primarily, again, I'm talking about leadership. So if we ask the leadership of the organization, what's your pain? There is an excellent book series. One of the challenges that I ran into as a consultant is I had to learn how to do sales, because that's really not what I am. I'm not a salesperson. The philosophy that I went to use was solution selling. It's a great book. One of the advantages of having our new online audio series stuff, you can go get the book of solution selling book for $5 online and $4 shipping. A great book, and what it talks about is it talks about pain. So if you were to go to the leadership of your organization, what would they say is the biggest pain that they have? Do they need to grow? Do they need to be more profitable? Do they need to reduce the lead time of their product? What is it that they need to do? This is a prerequisite, no matter whether we're talking about small organizations or large organizations. You've got to get this figured out, and you've got to get the leadership to understand this is worth doing. And that applies for any continuous improvement, whether we're talking about lean or Six Sigma, any of the continuous improvement philosophies. So very important, not just for small organizations, but all organizations. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between large and small organizations, and this will kind of introduce us to the rest of the presentation. Small organizations, everybody has many jobs. When you go into a small organization, everybody has a whole bunch of different things that they're doing. I've been in small organizations as a full-time employee. In most of those organizations, I was director of quality. I was director of continuous improvement. In many cases, I was out doing inspection. I was actually implementing, out on the floor, actually running some of the continuous improvement events. And I actually had a relatively limited, job in terms of the different things I was doing. You go to other people out on the organization, and they're doing everything. They're doing production control. They're doing actual operations. They're doing training. They're doing any number of things that you can think of. So very common for people in small organizations to have many jobs. Whereas when you get into larger organizations, back when I was at Lazy Boy, I just had one function. And that's all I ever did. Didn't think about doing anything else. Because as you get into the larger organization, it gets much, much more specialized. We're going to talk about people leaving. This is actually in the state of Utah, and we'll talk about this here in just a minute. State of Utah, the number of the unemployment level is lower than the nation's unemployment level, which is at historic lows. So the one thing that the small organizations have is people leaving all the time, especially when you get into highly trained, like continuous improvement type experts. They'll come and they'll work for a small company for a little while, and then they'll take off and go work for Northrop Grumman or Hill. And we'll talk about that here in a minute in terms of why. Whereas again, large organizations, technical staff tends to be very stable. Small organizations, time is really critical. There's no time. In fact, in most cases, there's not enough time to get done what they feel like they need to get done. So what ends up happening is we need to be respectful of that, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit. Large companies, in a large company when I was at Lazy Boy, I had more than enough time to do my job. Doesn't mean I wasn't busy, but more than enough time because I was so dedicated to the job and it was so specific. Had much more time available than when I was with the smaller organizations. There were so many things going on and so many crises and different things, very hard to find time to spend improving and applying the concepts of continuous improvement. Typically small organizations, low volume, high mix. most small organizations don't do the same thing over and over. Now, there are exceptions, obviously, but most of the time it's more of a job shop environment. So we'll talk a little bit about how that affects what how they can get the job done, as opposed to larger organizations. In many cases, higher volume and low mix. So a lot of repetitive work. I'm about 5 minutes from the Autoleaf facility that makes airbags. The Autoleaf facility in northern Utah is one of the only companies that has ever won the Shingo Prize twice, and it's just an amazing facility. But they're making airbags, and those airbags, they make production cells that have maybe 3 or 4 products that ever go through that cell. So they can optimize, they can get really streamlined in terms of how they do things. Small organizations change quickly, so there's not always, the large organizations don't always have the benefit, and we're going to talk about that. The ability to change quickly is one of the benefits of small organizations. We'll talk about why that's important, and I'll give you an analogy that I found at a small company. Large companies, because of the bureaucracy and the size, very slow to change. So that's actually an advantage for small companies. Small companies tend to have expert systems. Expert systems are where we have people that create their jobs, and because they create them based on what they think is the right thing to do, as opposed to having a group of people decide what should production control be and how should they be doing this. This term expert systems came from someone I worked with that had a small company for years, and he was exactly right, that there tends to be these isolated systems created by an individual that functions, but when that person leaves or changes positions, there's a lot of difficulty because now that expert system may not work for someone else. Again, we'll talk about that here in a minute. Well-defined work on large organizations. Large organizations they typically have very well-defined roles and a lot of standardization. We'll talk about that here in just a sec. Small organizations, training tends to be very informal. Training tends to happen kind of seat of the pants. Let's go out and talk about something, and we'll kind of maybe do some training as we're talking about it on the floor. But the tendency to have more deeper training, and I'm going to give you some examples here in a minute, tends to not happen very much in small organizations. Large organizations often do 4-day workshop on design of experiments or whatever, happens all the time. So there's some disadvantages for small organizations because of that. So let's start talking first about the people. So this is what we just talked about a second ago. Small organizations, everybody wears many hats. When you think of lean and continuous improvement, we really need a champion. Small organizations really have trouble assigning a champion because first off, nobody has the expertise, because the small organizations, there's a book that I'll recommend at the end called E-Myth. Small organizations tend to be built around technicians, people that are really good at what they do. They're really good machinists, they're really good fab people, they're really good at composites, whatever. They're really good at that, but they don't necessarily understand the ins and outs and the value of continuous improvement and lean. So what tends to happen is there isn't an expertise for lean, and everybody has so many hats and they're so busy that nobody really ever focuses on the improvement effort. And so we'll talk a little bit about here in a minute about how we can maybe change that. Jack of all trades, this kind of goes right in with the many hats. Continuous improvement usually is not, in a small organization, is not that high on the list. And I guess I should clarify that. broad continuous improvement. Continuous improvement in terms of my technical ability, my technical skills, and I'll use a machine shop as an example. Machine shop tends to be the creator, the person that starts the organization tends to be a machinist, a really good machinist usually. And what they tend to do then is they focus all of their time and effort on the machining part of the organization. So improvement is when they go in and they make better programs and they find better tools for cutting and get new machines that can do multiple cuts and blah, 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 blah. Right, they're really good at improving that. But then when you step back and say, what about the flow through the organization? What about pulling product through rather than forecasting? What about point of use? What about blah, on and on? They don't really think about those kinds of things. And since there is no one that is someone that's dedicated to continuous improvement, lean tends to be an afterthought. Everybody's busy, everybody's got a lot going on, tend to be jack of all trades, but the one trade that doesn't really get focused on is broad types of continuous improvement. We talked about this a second ago, staffing. The unemployment rate in Utah is currently 2.5%. Unemployment in the US is 3.6, and you can see how it's been dropping pretty significantly over the years. Bottom line for small organizations, everybody in the state of Utah is hiring. Small organizations can't offer the benefit packages that large organizations can. And because of that, people tend to leave small organizations all the time. I have probably 8 or 10 organizations that I'm working with currently in either lean, continuous improvement type things or advanced quality systems that I help them with. All of those companies, when we do the management review for our quality system and we do the risk analysis that's now expected in the ISO and AS 9100 world, organizational risk, the first one on everybody's list is I can't find people. It's the number one issue that everybody has. So it's very hard to sustain any sort of a continuous improvement initiative when you can't find especially qualified people and can't get them to stay with your organization to be part of that. And it's a very common thing. And I guess it's probably more sensitive to me because of being in the state of Utah. It's just really hard right now for small organizations. We talked about product mix being an issue here. When you get into the smaller organizations, many times it's the job shop, even project shop level work, which means it's much harder to standardize, much harder to understand how continuous improvement might apply. We've all been there. You walk into a small organization and you start talking about lean, and they say lean doesn't work here because we don't make the same thing over and over. So that understanding of the fact that there's waste everywhere. In fact, in many cases, smaller organizations, the job shop, they have more waste than the traditional manufacturing in the larger organizations. They just don't understand what it is. So again, we're kind of back to getting leadership to understand not only I have a pain, I need to reduce my lead time, get them to understand that even in a job shop environment, we can implement things that will shorten the lead time. One of the small organizations that I worked with made laser diagnostic equipment. We made a tabletop model. It was about a $20,000 tabletop unit that was beam profile for lasers. So it gave you all the characteristics that you can think of your laser beam. That equipment typically when we started, it was typical 8 weeks, 6 weeks, somewhere in there to be able to get it done and get it out to someone ordering that. When we applied the lean concept, spent a good amount of time doing that, they were able to get it down to where they could ship those units same day. And of course, obviously, what we ended up doing is we made a small supermarket So we made the units in advance. It turns out the customization of the unit was a small thing that was done. It took about an hour, and that customization, it was a software customization, gave the customer the unique things that they wanted, but the unit underneath that was basically always the same. So we made a small supermarket. I think their demand was 3 a month, 4 a month, something like that. So I think we made a supermarket of 3, I believe. So the shipping could actually pull out of that supermarket and ship same day. The volume increase in terms of our sales was significant because our competitors were still working on 12-week lead times, 6-week lead times, whatever it was. And so for us to be able to do same day shipment, we gained a significant amount of market share. In a job shop environment, this was not something that was necessarily repetitive. Expert systems. I think I told you that someone talked about this one time in a small organization. Expert systems, we have individuals that develop their own way of doing things, developed by an individual. And what ends up happening is they are the only ones that understand how to do that. Plus the added challenge we have is their particular expert system may not necessarily tie in with my expert system, which is another expert system in the plant. And these expert systems tend to be isolated systems of work that people do that don't fit well in terms of the overall organization necessarily. Of course, the other side of that is what we're all used to in the larger organizations, or in some cases, I'll show here in a second, even smaller organizations have done that, and that is standardization. So I think I copied this out of the site below, and it looks like they probably copied it out of LEI. But the idea is we're all familiar with these types of documents for standard work. Very seldom, if ever, do you see something like that in a small organization unless they've had someone help them understand this. And this can apply to repetitive work and non-repetitive work. Machine shop, and everybody tends to think that machine shop work is non-repetitive. The products may be different, but you still have to touch off the lathe. You still have to load and unload tools periodically. So those aspects of the operation can be standardized and become much more effective and eliminate this expert system portion. Time for improvement. Probably the biggest thing that I see in the small organizations. When I show you the things that I've done through my work with small organizations, you're going to see this is really the part that's probably had that I've seen has the biggest impact in terms of being able to help small organizations. Because when you go into small organizations, because everybody wears a bunch of hats, everybody has multiple jobs, on and on, people are just running around like crazy. And so what they see is they see no time. We don't have enough time to improve. We can't even get done what we're trying to get done. Of course, we all realize that if they would take a little bit of time to improve, they would free up some time and would be effectively less busy in their day-to-day work by standardizing and doing some of the things. But most small organizations haven't got that yet. They don't understand that. And again, I'm kind of making the assumption that in larger organizations, because of the way things are set up, and because in terms of standardized work and people doing the same jobs, that most people feel like they do have some time to do continuous improvement. Changes implemented. Small companies are not always, the problems that they have are not always bad things. I don't know if that's the way to say that. The reason that most companies, larger companies, like to use small companies is because they are flexible, they are quick, they are rapid to change. So I was in a company in Woodland Falls, Idaho. If you go back and look at the 2000 Shingo Prize winner, you can read some of the articles on Woodland Furniture. They make custom furniture. So this is also the company that I use when somebody says, we don't make the same thing over and over, so lean doesn't apply to us. Woodland Furniture makes custom furniture. When I was in there, they were making a table and chairs for Tiger Woods. It was a custom table, never to be made again. When you go look on their website, they will show all sorts of things like that little chair that I've got, or whatever that is, that little table that's there on the screen. It's all custom, it's all unique. They do a lot of antique replication, stuff like that. When they originally started working with the Idaho MEP, when they originally started working with them, their lead time was 16 weeks. They worked with the Idaho MEP, and I could go on and on about the things that I saw, because just some of the coolest things in terms of how they did things cheaply and rapidly and easily. When they got done with all of that, and I guess done isn't the right word, when they got to the point where I visited them, because they were still going, still improving, they had got down to where they could make any of the custom pieces of furniture that they provided in 4 days. They could build it and ship it in 4 days. So they thought, this is really cool. So what they did, and this is the story that they laugh about, what they did is they went out to the market, to their market, and they advertised and said, we've done all this cool stuff. We can now make anything in any of your custom furniture that you need in 4 days. And as they were telling this story, they said when they did that, orders quit. Orders just dried up. Just almost instantly, everything stopped, and they couldn't figure out for the life of them what happened. They went out and they started talking to some of their customers, and their customers said, well, if you can make it in 4 days, then it must not be custom. It must be manufactured or whatever, mass production or something. So we don't want it. And so once they realized that, they said, oh, okay. So they went back out to their market, and they said, you know what? It was a typo. Oh, we're sorry. It still takes us 16 weeks. We're sorry about the typo. Orders started coming in again like normal. Only difference was they waited until 4 days before the order was due, and they would build it and ship it. They just didn't tell the customer. Sometimes the customer would come back, they said 16 weeks. They would come back 6 weeks before it's due. God, we got done with our house. Is there any way you can expedite that piece of furniture for us? Well, yeah, we can have it to you in 4 days. And they just laughed. They thought this is again Woodland Furniture. They thought that was so funny that they could do that. But they literally got to where everything they could do was in 4 days. The analogy that I want to talk about is the story they told us, because at the time I was with Lazy Boy. We were going and visiting them as a benchmarking. And they said, small companies are like rowboats. In my case up there, the racers, we're like rowboats. If we want to change, we all jump out of the boat, we pick up the boat, we turn it around, we set it back in water, and we jump back in, and off we go in a new direction. And I thought that was so insightful that they thought about it in that way. But then they said, Lazy Boy, talking to us, you guys are like a battleship destroyer. If you want to change, you crank the wheel, whatever the thing is on the battleship destroyer that makes it turn, and 18 knots later, the ship starts to turn. So their analogy was, look, we're fast and flexible, and that's part of our competitive advantage. And they were exactly right. And that honestly is part of the competitive advantage for small organizations. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done and seen in the small organizations that have been pretty effective. So first, high mix, low volume. It is still very common for high mix, low volume in the shops that are the small organizations. So there's a book, I'll show it to you in the end, written by Mr. Connor, I can't think of his first name, in the MEP in Oregon, about lean for the small organizations. And one of the things that he talks about is a PQR analysis. So if you look right there in the center of the screen, that product family matrix, that's right out of Learning to See. And you may remember that. Left and right, those are the brackets that are at Acme Stamping in Learning to See. And you notice how what they've done is they've gone and they've listed the processes across the top and the products vertically. So the reason that they do that is because it lets them group products together, thinking that we could create a cell out of that product grouping. And when you do the value stream map, you want to find those groups because that's a value stream, can be those multiple product groups. I talked about Autoleave and how they had 4 or 5 different products in a cell. That's what they're doing. They're grouping similar products so that changeovers are minimized, and they were able to do all kinds of things. But the idea is grouping the products together. In a high mix shop, that's the kind of thing that you need to do. There is a much more formal analysis that honestly, until I had seen that book from Mr. Connor, I really didn't even know it existed. And that's PQR analysis, product quantity routing. What that is it's really a much more formal and much deeper product family matrix process. And I have seen this used many times in small organizations. All of a sudden they realize that they can group products together, and those products have similar processes. So by being grouped together, they can be analyzed and improved together. So helps provide a little bit more focus on setting up improvement to a group of products rather than just a single product. Okay. Oh, there we go. Improvement time. Just a second, I want to make sure I didn't miss one. Yep. Okay, improvement time. Really important that we allocate time for improvement. Now, again, this isn't something that's unique to small organizations. It's just something that small organizations really don't get. And that is, you go to your employee on the floor and say, I want you to do some 5S or something on the side. But I want you to, and the implication is, I want you to do it while you're doing the rest of your job. Well, I can't do that. I'm too busy on the rest of my job. I can't even get the rest of my job done, let alone get improvement done. So if we don't dedicate time, and when I say we, really needs to come from the leadership of the organization, have to dedicate the improvement time so that we allocate time to do those improvement projects. The way I usually explain it is, if we make stuff, and usually I'll hold up one of my hands, we spend all of our time making stuff, then I'll hold up the other hand and I say, if we spend a little bit of time getting better at making stuff, we're going to make more stuff. And that usually gets the understanding that we need to allocate time to improvement, just like we do our production operations. One of the things that that was very successful at one of the small organizations that I worked at, they had one product that they had been working on. They were making roughly about 200 a week, and they had never made more than 200, 250 a week, and they needed to get to 400. So all I did was went to Home Depot, got this little piece of whiteboard, posted it out there, and did a simple daily report out with the leadership, the machinists that were there, and the supervisors. All we did was stand there for 5 minutes. We talked about what actually happened, and you're all familiar with this. Talk about what actually happened, created some actions that you'll see over there on the right side, and through that, within less than well, couldn't have been much more than a week and a half, and we were consistently making 400. The board itself, to put this up and get it going, took less than an hour. The time that the employees were involved was about 10 minutes, and it was only the employees that were involved in this particular process. Ended up being a very effective, very simple way to get things started. Now, as soon as we took the board down, things dropped back, but I'll talk about that because we went to a completely different process that took us much farther in this particular product mix that we're making here. Time effective introductions for training. So a time effective introduction to lean. So to actually get everyone in the organization to understand, especially on the shop floor, what lean was, what we ended up having to do is we had to take small groups of people, and we actually went in groups of about, I believe it was about 8 people, and we actually did the training on overtime. So what would happen is the second shift would come in for a few minutes early. We would do the training, and the training, as you can see down at the bottom, though this is actually what the training dates looked like, 3 to 3:20 for on the 9th, 3 to 3:20 on the 10th, and then again on the 16th and 19th. But you can see 20 minutes. So the swing shift would come in a half an hour early. We would do their 20-minute training, and then they would go to work. The day shift would stay an extra 30 minutes, and we would do the 20-minute training then. And the thing I put up here on the right, the image, is the picture of the training that we went through. We did it all on a whiteboard, didn't use this, but when we were done, if you notice, you can see a bunch of signatures on there. That's the people signing as evidence of the training. And then this is hanging in the shop, so it gives everybody the reminder that they went through this training and what it was all about. So did the training on overtime, did it in small increments rather than trying to do long training, small increments. And it took almost 4 weeks to do the training because we did a little bit at a time. One of the advantages of doing a little bit at a time like this is the concept of spaced repetition. And that is, if you think about something multiple times, you have a much better chance of retaining it. So whenever the group would come back, the very first thing I would do is I would ask them questions about what we talked about last time. And pretty soon they got that, and so they were all ready. And the concepts actually stuck pretty well. As part of this training, the rest of the time that they were working, they would go spend time out on the floor actually implementing some of the things we had talked about. Value stream mapping, again, worked out pretty well, but the same problem. It was really hard to get people to do this. So what we did, you see the board behind these guys, went and got a board from Home Depot again and did the same thing, 15-minute increments. We had everybody standing around this board, done at the shift change. We would do, in this case, we actually did both shifts together because all we did was the people that were involved in this particular product. But we would all stand there, and we developed this handwritten board as a group and did the training in terms of the understanding of what's going on. We did that as part of the stand-up. Took us about 4 weeks to get through that whole process. But again, the idea was small increments of time, got everybody involved so that everybody understood why and what we were doing. The outcome of all of that was we were able to actually get much more formalized on this particular product. So we were actually able to do a future state. And the work combination diagram, I told you that the standard work things that you hardly ever see in a small organization, there's a work combination diagram that we did as a team to get to understand the way that we could rearrange this process that you see over on the right. This is not what it looked like before, this is what it looked like after. And ended up being a single piece flow. You can see where it says small cart over on the left. The parts would be picked up there and they would work their way around in a circle by the operator while one part was running in the machine, that NL2500. While one part was running in the machine, they were doing the secondary work, which is what shows up in that work combination diagram. This all came from that first value stream map that I showed you a minute ago. But realized to put much of this in place was probably a 4-month cycle time to actually get this all done, because it took a while because we were doing just a little bit at a time. But it was a significant improvement. The two blue things that came up, what we found was in our original production, the ProPen, which is a marking tool, and the vibratory bowl, it turns out that we were sharing those on multiple machines, and it was costing us a lot of time running around going to these single pieces of tooling or single pieces of equipment that everybody needed to use. All the machines were going there. It was costing a significant amount of time. So what we did, which is traditional lean, is we bought extras. So we made, I think they ended up making 3 of these production cells and bought 3 ProPens and 3 vibratory bowl, the vibratory deburrs. And that let us go to a single piece flow with significant impact. I think the most they ever made was about 1,000 a week, much better than they could ever have done before. Again, 6S. Now 6S, if you go to the National Tooling and Machining Association, they decided 6S was what they called 5S. They added safety, which, some organizations have done that. We did it the same thing. You can see the training sessions up on the top. They're all 15-minute training sessions. I guess in the case of the first one, it was 45 minutes because we actually went out, and this is what they're doing out there in the shop. We went out and actually applied the first part of 5S, which is sort. We went and actually did that. And then after that, shorter sessions. So again, small increment sessions done on overtime as much as possible. Same thing, we had the diagram, the single point lesson that we were using. Everybody signed it as part of their evidence of training. So just to summarize, just like in large organizations, leadership has to support what's going on. And if there is no pain in the organization, which I can't imagine there's an organization that has no pain, you're not going to get any support for improvement. But assuming that there is pain that lean and continuous improvement can solve, which is pretty broad, leadership needs to allocate time. They need to give a little bit of time. I realize it's not going to be much, maybe an hour a week per person, something like that. They need to allocate that time because that's what will get that time in the small organizations that will give them the where they realize that they can take that time. Support the development of internal resources. Even though I know we're going to have turnover and we understand that, we still need to select a couple of people, have them go through a lean bronze, something where they get some training, assuming that you bring someone in from the outside, you let them work with that person from the outside. Really important to develop those skills. Be sensitive to the criticality of time. You saw all the things that I showed you. It was all about figuring out how could I come in and do things in small increments of time so that you don't disrupt training. The value stream map tool that we used to use in the MEP, we would do 2.5 days with a group of people. If we did 2.5 days with a small manufacturer with even 3 or 4 or 5 people, we're going to significantly impact their ability to produce product. They just can't do that. So we figured out ways to do it in shorter, quicker. Plan on people changing. You just got to expect people are going to change over. So plan on that, figure out what we need to do to manage that. Think about bringing in expertise from the outside. Very common to want to bring in outside expertise, even if it's just training. Don't get discouraged. Small organizations can change faster than large ones, but at the same time, there are some specific things that are needed. Where to go for help? Recommendation would be contact if you're a small organization, contact the MEP. They're really good at what they do. Ask your customers for help. Many of you are maybe with larger organizations. If you're with a larger organization, go to your suppliers and tell them, look, we can come and help you do this. Again, realize that they're really pressed for time, but help them through that. Find people, consultants that specialize in small organizations because they understand these challenges. If self-learning is what you would like to do, there's the book by Gary Connor, Lean Manufacturing for the Small Shop. It was a Shingo Prize winner. And then E-Myth, which isn't really about continuous improvement, it's about small businesses. Very insightful. So that's all I really had to present. Were there anybody have any questions that I can help you with?
Yes, there is one question. Thank you, Paul. Great presentation. One of the questions is, since you're spending time, short periods of time on training and meetings, what else do you do during the day to make travel cost effective?
When you say travel costs, what?
I'm assuming they're thinking that maybe you travel to these
Uh,
organizations and
mhm.
consult, but even if you're, I guess, part of that small organization, what are some of the other activities and things that you're doing?
Okay. Um, Honestly, since I've come out and been doing this on my own, I work almost exclusively with small organizations, both with respect to continuous improvement and helping them implement advanced quality systems, AS 9100, ISO, those kind of things. Almost all of the organizations, I tell them up front, the best way to do this is 2 hours a week. Because what I do is I come in for 2 hours a week and then I uh, do training, whatever we're going to do, and then give them usually a couple of hours of homework. So the individuals have about 5 hours a week to do. And honestly, the way I do that is I just try as much as possible to group the organizations that I see by geographical area. So I'm in northern Utah in the Ogden area. If you've been there, tomorrow I go to Logan. Logan is about 40 miles from here. I will have a client in the morning and then I'll have another client in the afternoon. So what I try and do is I try and group the people, but I just realized that what I've had to do is I have to do things around what they need, which typically becomes small increments of time. So 2 hours max a week usually.
Okay, thank you. Another question, what what are the results or what's been the reaction if you have gone to the leaders of the organization and asked them, well, what is your pain? What is your burning platform? What's typically occurred when you do that? Do you get more buy-in?
Yeah, again, what I would recommend you do is pick up the book on solution selling to answer that question. This guy, and I can't remember his name, it's been a while. This guy just did an excellent job. In fact, he has what he calls a 9 block, and it's just an amazing tool. It's just 9 blocks. And what he starts with is, tell me what's going on here. Tell me what your pain is. And the person, of course, will start talking. And then what he does is as he works his way down this 9 block, he refines that until he gets down to, here's what the pain actually is. I need to increase my capacity. I need to whatever. And it's a really delicate exercise in terms of how you ask the questions, open-ended questions, things like that. But you get down to what it is really he would like, or the person would like to be able to do in terms of getting better. Then the second column of the 9 block is why, and what you start talking about there is impact. What would happen if you were able to increase your capacity by 20% without adding additional resources? What would happen? And they say, well, this and this and improve this and bottom line this. Now you're getting down to quantifiable numbers. And then the final part of the 9 block is, I think I can help you there. This particular process has been known to improve, free up capacity in small organizations. Um, and it's been proven to do that. So I'm confident that we'll be able to do that. Would you be interested in that? And so it's a very detailed discussion. Now, um, I'm still going to tell you that probably half of the small organizations that I work with, most of the time I start by working with them on quality systems because that's easy because their customers come in and say, if you don't get this quality system in place, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. So it's easy for them to make that decision. And that's where I get that. That's how I get most of that business. When I go in there, pretty soon I become a trusted expert. That's when we start having the discussion about the continuous improvement. And I can still tell you that probably half or maybe a little less than half of the organizations still don't get it and never do actually engage me or really anyone else. They just continue to chug along. So I don't know if that answers the question. So there's definitely a way to do it. Solution selling, go get that book, but doesn't mean it's always successful.
All right, thank you so much. Although your presentation was specific to small organizations, I think it also a lot of this can also effectively be used in large organizations. I see that myself working in a large organization, and how do you bring some of these tools and techniques there also is very effective. So thank you again, Paul, for your time and great presentation. Want to remind everybody that next month, excuse me, in April 8th at noon Central Time, we are going to have Walter Jankowski, and he's going to be talking about top technology trends that totally transform. Are you and your organization ready for them? And I've heard him do this presentation that's very interesting, and it's unique. So thank you again for your time. This will be recorded, so you can go out and see it again, and you will also be getting continuing or RU credits for it that will be sent to you. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great day.